I always had like a salad on the side or a roast potato or a roast squash or whatever. But I never thought of them as like the center of the plate. I always thought of them as like, oh, it's just something we have to have and we throw it on. And I think once I started writing this book, vegetables became like so important to the plate and to creating something delicious.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Matt Rodbard, here with Senior Editor Anna Hezel.
Today on the show, Matt is catching up with Jenny Rosenstrach, a cookbook writer and the voice behind the long-running food blogging podcast, Dinner, a Love Story. Matt, what did you and Jenny talk about?
For Jenny Rosenstrach, dinner is a gift that she has given each and every night, and something that she has celebrated for years via her food writing under the banner, Dinner, a Love Story. In this really fun conversation, we talk about her work as a cookbook reviewer. We also talk about her recent New York Times best-selling cookbook, The Weekday Vegetarians, and what it means to go plant-based for only part of the week. It was a really fun conversation and great getting to know Jenny a little bit better.
Here's Matt talking with Jenny.
Jenny Rosenstrach, welcome to the Taste Podcast.
It's so good to be here.
I've wanted to get you on the podcast ever since we talked in the fall. We did a print story for a Monday interview, and I got to know you a bit through that. But wanted to get a little bit more into your book, Weekday Vegetarians, is New York Times bestseller, and really one of my favorite books of the year. I thought the design and the way the recipes came together was so creative and clever. But first, I just wanted to get a sense of Dinner, a Love Story, just for our listeners. You launched this a while ago. What is Dinner, a Love Story?
Well, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a website devoted to family dinner and the way that I use food to take care of people. It's expanded and evolved over the course of the 12 years that I've been writing it. But it comes down to how can we make dinner for the people we love or for ourselves in a way that, we don't lose our minds making it happen, and also in a way that makes our lives a little bit better every time we do it. I think of dinner still after all these years of cooking for 2 kids, and I still think of it as a kind of a gift that I give to myself every day. And I just try to help people see it that way too.
I love the way you put it, dinner as a love language. Has the actual love language, the dishes, changed over the course of running Dinner, a Love Story? Is there any kind of change? And maybe I'm tipping to the Weekday Vegetarians project in the book, but have you seen a shift?
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, the first book I wrote, Dinner, a Love Story, was already a chronicle of the way my cooking evolved, even in just like a 10-year period, because just like the way we cook just changes so much based on our life stages. Like before, when I first got married, I was like teaching myself how to cook, and that's what the first section is about. And then when we had babies, it was like anything that was edible was dinner, and that was a different way to cook. And then, like the last section was sort of like, I called it something like When the Angels Began to Sing, which is when like we actually started cooking meals that were like recognizable as like a proper sit down dinner, and not food all over the floor and
ground into your rug. Yeah.
But then that's just the way I cook, but also the food that we've prepared over the course of the years. It's just like anyone else. Like the food, I'm in the food world, so I am as susceptible to the trends as anyone else. So I was like all about the kale salad in the aughts, and then like Ottolenghi took over my life, and like, when Plenty came out, and but now just to lead into the Weekday Vegetarians, that book really marks a shift in the way that in the ingredients that we've been using. Obviously way more plant-based. And we just felt like, just the reason why I wrote the book was it was multi-pronged, but one of the main reasons was it was right after the 2016 election, and I kind of felt like almost irresponsible just pushing all these recipes that were meat-based. I was in a position where I was reaching people who were cooking, and I just felt like, all the climate change and that conversation was getting really loud and also ignored during that period. And I felt like, what can we do? What can I do to help? I knew I had read that taking meat out of your every day, or reducing meat would is like the single most important thing we can do to combat climate change. And so that just sort of, and I had 2 teenage girls at the time. I mean, I still do, but they were reading about this stuff, and they're of that generation that's like, Mom, why are we having meat every night? And so they pushed me in a way that it was kind of this long conversation, and then it happened overnight. We just kind of decided.
You just started the rules, and you write about them in the introduction or the night that you decided that you were going to present this idea. But I want to step back before we get into the guts of the book. But was during this journey from Dinner Love Story into current time, is there a cuisine, like a style or just a cuisine that has really risen in your family as like something you cook often? Like, you cook like Japanese style often or anything like that? Or they're not examples.
I do love Japanese cooking. I love just the flavors, like I'm generalizing here, but of Asian cuisine. Like, I just love that like salty soy umami, and my kids do too, which makes it easy. So yeah, that I wouldn't say that defines my cooking, but I mean, what defines my cooking is just just food that tastes good. that's yeah. I mean, and I'm always, I write about cookbooks a lot, so a lot of the time it's like kind of a big mishmash of like what I'm reading about and what other people are talking about. And it's like the dinner table for us, like in addition to just being a place where we could all gather around at the end of the day, it was also like my office, like, and it was like a little it was like a little lab, so I would be constantly experimenting with whatever recipes were coming across my desk, whether it was on Instagram or whether it was through this latest Adelengi book that came across my desk, or it was just always kind of like I just always kind of wanted to see what else was out there and try it out on the kids.
Sure. And you've reviewed cookbooks for many publications, and we can talk about that. But let's talk about the ground rules of Weekday Vegetarians, and how does meat enter the picture? Is it a vegetarian cookbook and only meat on the weekends, as its title suggests, or is it a little more flexible?
I think we need a lot more people eating less meat versus fewer people eating no meat, because I feel like it's an easier way to sell it. And the reason why we've been able to stick with it as long as we have, not just stick with it, but really like it's become a bona fide lifestyle for us to just kind of default to plant-based cooking. But the reason is because we always, just like everything, it's like moderation. We have this out. The way the book was conceptualized and the way we started was 5 days a week we would have plant-based food, Monday through Friday, vegetarian dinners. And then on the weekends, we would let ourselves, have our splurges, and we would like hit Shake Shack, or we would, just have pan-sear pork chop, or all of our favorites that our kids had, were like synonymous with our kids' childhoods and our childhoods, frankly, too. Like, we found that was a hard thing. Like, we had all these nostalgic attachments to recipes. I mean, then they were all meat-based, like not all of them, but most of them were. And they weren't nostalgic because of the meat, but they were just nostalgic because that's the way we cooked. And so, but that's how we started. Now, it's not like I will not have chicken on a Tuesday like that. Of course I will. But like I would say, 80% of the time I'm eating, it's going to be a plant-based meal.
I think our listeners are going to be wondering, when you started this journey of Weekday Vegetarian, did you feel better? Did it change the way you spent? I mean, I think those are the practical questions I think our listeners are interested in. I know it's talking about these things is not easy because, you might have been feeling great before. So I don't want to like assume you were feeling bad. I don't want to like put you into that box, but
I mean, I get that question a lot, and it's a tricky question, but because all food is good food. But I do feel like what this book has done has really gotten me to think about vegetables, like not just like not eating meat, but like really being vegetable forward about things, which I always had like a salad on the side, or like a roast potato or roast squash or whatever. But I never thought of them as like the center of the plate. I always thought of them as like, oh, it's just something we have to have and we throw it on. And I think once I started writing this book, vegetables became like so important to the plate and to creating something delicious that I would kind of start there. And then when you have, and so like half the plate is vegetables now versus, like a third or whatever. And And that just automatically like makes you feel good. Like I just feel because that was half the plate, like the rest of the stuff was being squeezed. The rest of the portions were being squeezed. So I didn't eat as much as the rest. And so, yes, like I felt better after dinner most of the time. Not every night, but as a matter of course, like I just like the way I feel. Yeah. And I have more energy like when I eat like that during the day too. So absolutely. But cost for sure. Like I still can't believe my like how much my Trader Joe's bill or my just regular old Stop and Shop bill changes. Like I just didn't realize when you're eating meat 5 times a week that really adds up.
It does. You look at your grocery store bill, receipt at the end, and you look at meat, and meat prices have gone up. Rightly so. I think people are you should spend money for meat. It's kind of important to be responsible and just pay for good meat. Now
we can spend money on high quality meat, and and we can feel okay about it. It doesn't feel like it's going to crush us.
I'm going to give you 2 vegetables, and I just want to get a sense of how you would put a meal around these 2. This is like real quick fire style. No, one is let's just do Napa cabbage or Savoy. We'll do either cabbage. So cabbage, how would you cook that as a centerpiece meal? Use that vegetable.
I love cabbage, and it's a new love story for me. It was not the case before quarantine. I really discovered it and fell in love. I mean, I always went immediately to the slaw place when I had cabbage, but like I discovered roasting and cooking down cabbage during the pandemic, and so this is what I just made 2 days ago. Like I caramelized onion, like just 2 little basic supermarket yellow onions, and then cook those down so they're nice and sweet. You don't even need a ton of oil, but then like salt, pepper, and then I throw in half of a Napa cabbage shredded, like just chopped, and then that cooks down, and it's just like roast, and you can put it on high heat, and it gets like nice and roasty and brown, and then I put all of that. I wrap that all up in like a pie crust with like a little mustard underneath, and you can put a little apple cider vinegar in the onions. I find the mustard does kind of the same thing. It just cuts that sweetness if you like the sweetness. And then you roast it, and you bake it, and it's like this perfect little cabbage onion tart. But yeah, in the book, I have a recipe for braised cabbage. It's like a cider braised cabbage where you just like have a Savoy or a green cabbage and you brown it just like you would be browning, like a chicken thigh. And then you remove it and I fry some shallots and like tomato paste I add in there. And
I love this. I love the way that the flavors are coming together. And this does feel like a main dish, like braised cabbage can be main.
Totally. And it's like, it just takes on this like flavor that I just didn't know. I mean, this is what I mean. Like, I feel like I learn things every day, but like, I can't believe how much. I mean, it's because I was writing this book where I was really forcing myself to see those kinds of like just very humble vegetables as things that could be the starring player. And it worked.
Let's do green beans. Green beans, fresh, green beans, frozen. What's a center, like a main using green beans?
My bar is very low with green beans. So like what I'll do is I'll just like throw that, like usually I get the Trader Joe's, like they have beautiful like frozen sweet French style green beans they're called. They're basically like skinny airy cooker, but they're all trimmed and you just shove them into the skillet. I will say that like recently I have discovered having a little compound butter of like a miso chive compound butter, which sounds fancy, but it takes 2 seconds to make as long as your butter is room temperature. And I just kind of keep a stash of that in the fridge. And when I just have those beans and I toss them with that butter, it's like, it's so special. And with an egg on top, I mean, that's a light dinner. I don't know if like a mom listening to this, like who's feeding like, her football player son is going to like see that as a dinner. But for lunch, certainly.
It sounds delicious. So you're using light miso or dark miso plus butter plus anything else in this compound butter?
A little bit of sea salt, but I don't even know if you need it with the miso. But I use it on every roast vegetable. And it's actually, I had a recipe for like a sweet potato in my book that used a miso butter, but it was just like miso mixed with butter, not the scallions. And when I interviewed Kay Chun, who's a recipe developer for the New York Times recently, and it was just all about how to upgrade your vegetables in easy ways. And she was the one who was like, we were talking about the compound butter, and she said, put ginger in there, put garlic in there, put scallions in there, put everything. That's like, and then just use it as like, just dollop it on your roasted vegetables. And I did that with like roast eggplant, with roast squash, anything roasted. If you just you roast them with a tiny bit of olive oil, and you take them out, and then you stir the butter in when you're serving. And so she just kind of took it to the next level for me.
It sounds amazing. Do you get the question about protein? Like if I'm eating plant-based during the week, and we have this perception that we need protein all the time, so much protein. How do you negotiate that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think about a lot, and there's a whole section in the book dedicated to the protein add-on, because I do kind of find it's like we've reversed our thinking here with, like, it used to be, okay, I have chicken, so what, what I was saying before, what salad do I throw on the side at the last second? And I kind of feel like that's how I've relegated the protein, which is it's good and bad, but I'll have those green beans, for instance, and so there's I'll just throw the 7-minute egg on top, and that's the protein. There's crispy chickpeas have basically replaced the basic chicken breast in our house. We just throw that into salads and into grain bowls, and everyone loves them. And
it's a superpower to have a good roasted chickpea recipe or fried chickpea recipe. It really is kitchen superpower.
Luckily, both of my daughters just kind of tried them when we were first playing around with them and loved them immediately. And so it was actually my daughter Abby's idea to throw them into our chicken Caesar salad instead of the chicken.
Yeah.
And it's her number one most requested meal now. So,
do you use oil? How do you get them crispy? What's your trick?
The trick is to start with them as dry as possible, and then I roast them sometimes, and then I just put them in the skillet in 3 tablespoons, a little bit more of olive oil, maybe
a little bit more. A little bit more.
The trick is when you're frying them in the oil is to just not touch them for a while. You want to stir them all the time, but it's you just let them sit a little bit longer than you think, because you can't over crisp them.
You can't. They're very foolproof with that. On the topic of protein, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this fake meat world we live in these days. And Beyond and Impossible are the major brands, but there really are everywhere. There's many sides to this argument. I wonder if you have a side, and if you've thought through the way that you want to move forward as a recipe developer and a leader in food. Do you want to cook with them? Do you not? Do you have an opinion?
I mean, like everyone, I was fascinated by all of the Beyond and Impossible, and there's so many of them now, and I felt like it was one of those things that I had to try when it happened. I was really into them. I was in fact writing a story for Cup of Joe, where I write a food column for. I was writing a taste test about it right before the pandemic hit, and so I had purchased 12 different kinds of fake meat. And then, of course, it was all canceled because it was scheduled for March 13th, 2020. And so we the person who was doing the tasting with. So I ended up with all of these, this frozen, quote, meat in my freezer. And so we cooked with it through for the first couple months. We didn't cook through all of it because by the 4th or 5th one, I was like, I can't eat this anymore.
You're living through a pandemic and you're using these products, man. You're putting yourself through it.
I would say Impossible was by far my favorite. But it just kind of got to the point where I was I like them as burgers. And I kind of felt since I was also writing the book at the time, I was I should just come up with my own veggie burger. I don't need to do this. And I did. It was the inspiration for the veggie burger that's in the book. And the veggie burger is, I kind of still don't know how I landed on it, because veggie burgers I've never really had a good one.
They're so hard to develop the recipes. We've tried at Taste.
The other annoying thing about veggie burgers, it's feels like a very witch's brew thing. You're throwing in rice and oats and mushrooms, and it takes it's a million ingredients, and but it takes an hour or two on the weekend, not even an hour, and then you freeze them into patty. You put them into patties in between parchment paper, and then you freeze them. So my recipe makes 10 patties. So we just use them. We just pull them out for last minute dinners. And then they become 10-minute dinners. But it's a really good recipe. They're the trick is to flatten them and to get the edges craggy so it tastes like burger.
Like a smash burger, kind of. It sounds like you're going smash burger style. I love that. Let's talk about your Cup of Joe column, because I love that column, and I love that you're writing for this very wide audience. And what do people most want to know?
I mean, they want to know the same thing that everyone wants to know, which is the only way I know how to write, which is how can we cook better, and how do we make food a part of our lives in a way that like we enjoy versus like we stress about. And I mean, they're such an amazing audience because her readers are so unbelievably engaged, and I almost feel like sometimes that I don't even have to be there. Like I just like write something as an excuse for them to talk, because like the comment section is so robust, and and I learned so much from her readers. And it's really fun. And Joanna Goddard, who's the one who is Cup of Joe.
The Joe, yeah.
Her whole mission is she wants people to, you know, always feel included, never feel bad about themselves when they leave. And she really, I don't know how she does it. She manages, like, this is like the most civilized community on the internet. And you really feel it in those comments. And so I love writing for her.
We'll link to that as well. I feel like you're a recipe developer and you've got a family and you're cooking a lot, but you're also out at restaurants and you're traveling when you can travel, and you've got, you know, great taste in everything, just reading your writing. And how do you find inspiration for these books? Do you have a favorite place to go, a place to travel, or coming to the city, or is it just from your reading the cookbooks that you review?
I mean, it's from all of those things. I think it's like it's kind of a big mystery, you know, like when people are like, how do you come up with your ideas? Like, you know, it's just like you're just naturally gravitate towards certain things. So you just like don't even know where this stuff like resides in your brain. But like, I will say that all of my books and all of the writing I do, just the inspiration comes from just like, this sounds super lame, but like just living my life. I have no idea what recipes I'm running on my newsletter next week. That's because, and I kind of like to think, this might be wishful thinking, but I'd like to think that's why I've been able to do it all these years, and why people are still reading, because like, I don't want anything to feel overly produced or slick, or I want it to feel like I talk about this all the time, but like, I hate recipes that are just recipes like out of context. Like I love hearing how a recipe fits into your life. Like just Cup of Joe we were talking about before, like there was a recipe for a one of like it just went bananas like with traffic. It was Alexandra Stafford, who writes Alexandra Cooks. She's this master bread maker, and she you know, that's the kind of recipe that like most people, I hear bread and yeast and I'm like, that's too much for me, it's a project. And but I was like, this bread, you can, like, she had a recipe for a loaf, like a peasant loaf bread, which you could like decide at 3:30 in the afternoon to make, and then you could have a fresh loaf for dinner. And just saying that sentence, like, I think puts it into context, and it's like, it just makes you feel like you can do it. And it's not just like it's just not some like, you know, recipe extricated from like some other world.
It's just not hollow. It's not a hollow promise. It's a real promise. And I think when you're writing in that newsletter form, you want a real execution. It's not a long form piece. It's a one recipe, two recipe newsletter. And I think Alexandra's recipes are great. They follow a promise. Mark Bittman has a promise. You have a promise. Yeah.
And I mean, also just like what we were talking about before, the way my family has evolved, like it's just, I'm so lucky that I named this whole thing Dinner Love Story, because that kind of applies to every stage in my life. And I feel like just last summer, one of my daughters was having like this skin issue, and we went to dermatologist after dermatologist, we couldn't figure it out. And finally we just decided to go like the diet route and try to eliminate gluten and dairy. And so like for like 3 months I was cooking without dairy and gluten. And, I never like wrote about this on the blog, so people must have been like, why is she suddenly she's giving us options for dairy free stuff? But like, it's just, you know, and that I learned so much from that period, like of just like what people are looking for, and and so like things like that are happening all the time, obviously. And so that's how I get inspired, just by like, what problem am I solving for my family? Hopefully this will resonate with some other family. Yeah. And so, you know, like our kids are in college now, like the dinner table looks completely different. So that's what I write about now. And it's like,
do they come home for dinner?
They're both in college. One of them is in Vermont. One of them's in Minnesota. And so they don't come home as often as I would like, but when they do, they have very specific requests, you know, for, you know, someone on when I was getting all like sad sacky about like, my kids are leaving me, you know, someone on my blog said, oh, well, you don't know the joy of the coming home dinner yet. Wait till you see that. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. It's like not a book that ends. There's like chapter after chapter. And like, so now there's like the coming home dinners. And
coming home from college is a moment, you know, you remember forever. I feel like it's some of it's sappy Hallmark style, but some of it's just like the practical, like walking in the door and having like some kind of smell, right? Do you have a book project in the works? Do you want to talk about, you're a New York Times bestseller for this one, and I'm sure you've got, irons in the fire.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on it now. I'm working on a proposal for my next one, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. I feel like what I was saying before about like, well, so where am I in this phase? A lot of me wants to do like the Weekday Vegetarians Part 2, just because when that book went to the printer, like in the next week, there were like 10 things that I was like, oh, I wish I put this in the book. And so I feel like I'm just kind of getting started on exploring plant-based eating, like really focused on vegetables first. And I just like the idea of vegetables being the star of the whole cookbook is so appealing to me. And like the first book, I'm not entirely sure I can do it like right now. And it's like, feels like a very big challenge to me, but that's part of the appeal, I guess. But also like, I do feel like just what we were talking about, just the different phases that we're moving in and out of. Like, I do feel like I'm moving into this phase where I'm using cooking. It's still a love story, but in a different way, like with just taking care of, our community and our friends. Last fall was kind of a rough fall for my family because my father-in-law died and my father was in like a terrible accident, and he's doing fine now. Good. But like a lot of it was taking care of, like not just the person who's sick, but just like my mother-in-law who suddenly was eating by herself. Like we would be cooking, like how to give her like a little bit of love, like through food. And, like just given when my dad was ready to eat, like bringing him matzo ball soup at the hospital. And just like, there's so many more ways to write about dinner, like in that context, and it's like not as fun as writing for kids. But it's like, it does feel like the more I write about those topics, the more people are saying, thank you for this. I like, it makes me feel so much better that you're going through this too. And so like, in a perfect, I don't know, the answer to your question is I would love to have a book that kind of addresses that phase of life.
I'm excited to follow. You review cookbooks and you've written large cookbook roundups for the New York Times and for other publications. I'd like to know, the spring is here and we're looking into summer and fall. What cookbooks are you enjoying? Is there any books in particular?
Well, I mean, there are a couple that are not out yet that I'm very much looking forward to the Eric Kim book. Sorry to admit this to you of all people. I don't know a lot about Korean cooking. And I just think he's, I've been reading The Galley. I got an advanced copy of it, and he's just a beautiful writer. And just speaking of what we were talking about before with returning home, like he has this whole section about returning home, and it's a love letter to his mother. And I'm just like such a sucker for that kind of stuff. So he's, and his recipes are amazing. So Allie Slagle's cookbook. I've never met her. I don't know her. But she's just like one of those recipe developers for the New York Times I guess she writes for a lot of publications now. But like I can always kind of tell, oh, that's an Allie Slagle recipe, because it's like she just has such fun recipes, and like my daughters like gravitate towards them. Like, the other day my daughter sent me a picture of, she was cooking at college for like the Super Bowl. She just made like was it like a warm goat cheese with like dates and bacon or whatever? It just like looks so good. And I was like, that's Allie, right? She said, yeah, of course.
So we ask all the guests on the Taste Podcast if there was a cookbook or food culture book that you could work on without the burden of time, meaning a deadline, or money, meaning a budget. What would that cookbook or food book be?
Do you remember that book Heat by Bill Buford 100 years ago?
Dario Batali, of course. Yeah, of course.
So I just feel like that was like during the age of journalism where people were like inserting themselves into experiences and then writing about them. And, but I just loved the way he wrote about learning how to cook. And I am so, for someone who's written about food for as long as I have, like, you would think I would be confident in my skills mostly, but there's so many voids in my like, technical culinary education. And I just feel like I would love to just work in a professional, awesome kitchen, like a Stone Barns, Blue Hill at Stone Barns kind of thing, and work and then write about it.
Well, Jenny Rosenstrach, thank you for joining the Taste Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And we are back with another three things where we shout out three things in food media, in cookbooks, in Oscar-nominated films, perhaps. Anna, what's your first of three things?
Okay, one food thing I'm really excited about this week is tuna noodle casserole, believe it or not. I've been sort of like feeling a little bit nostalgic for tuna noodle casserole, which is like, I'll admit, sort of a gross, sort of outdated dish in today's world. I think about
gross.
And I think about like the food that my grandparents made. But
yeah,
I really think that tuna noodle casserole holds up. I've been making like a little bit of a fancier version of it where I use like actual like slightly al dente pasta instead of the egg noodles that are sort of like famous in a tuna noodle casserole. And I make like a mushroomy bechamel instead of using the canned Campbell's soup. And it's really good. I really think it's time to sort of like revisit tuna noodle casserole as a society.
Questions. Okay, first question is, did you cover it in your book?
Yes.
Your tin fish book? You've covered it.
Yeah,
okay.
There's definitely going to be a really good recipe for tuna noodle casserole in my book coming out in spring 2023.
Shout out, plug. Second question. Okay, I can't get over the smell of tuna noodle casserole. This is me speaking, not you. I when you walk into a kitchen that has tuna noodle casserole in the oven, it's not food to me. It transcends food. It's something like industrial. It's something like maybe like there's a torture scenario happening in my brain. I just think that smell is just vile to me.
I texted my teenage niece yesterday to ask if she had ever had tuna noodle casserole because I wasn't sure if maybe this sort of like died out in our generation. And she had actually never even heard of it.
Oh, interesting.
And then I took her through the concept and she said something along the lines of, I have to be honest, that sounds awful.
I ain't gonna yuck your yum. I feel like you're the one to make it great. Last question about tuna noodle casserole. Do you put Ritz crackers on top?
So I've been really into putting salt and vinegar potato chips on top, like really crumbled up. They just get like really buttery and they add a nice like sharpness to the whole dish. But Ritz crackers also an awesome option.
Love it.
What's your first three thing?
Okay. Deep breath. We're going to talk about film right now for a second. We're going to talk about the film called Drive My Car, which, Anna, is the best film I've seen in 5 years. It is incredible. It is 3 hours long. Have you seen it?
I haven't. I've been dying to. It's on my list.
It's great. Ryosuke Hamaguchi is the director. It's based on a short story by Haruki Murakami, very famous Japanese author. And I got to say, the film is restrained. It has pacing. It has an incredible car. But to me, the food in the film speaks to me in many ways. I think that outside of being based around drama and the creation of a play and dramaturge, which is really cool, behind the scenes kind of gossip about theater, the food is interesting. And to me, the first kind of food scene is actually at a bar. And two of the characters, an older and a younger character, discuss an important plot point at a bar. And they've got these Japanese highballs with hand-carved cubes. And it's so beautifully shot. I just love seeing when food is shot by like a really like an auteur, it just makes me excited.
Yeah, it's so transportative because you can like sort of taste what the drink tastes like. And you can sort of like feel how cold and icy the drink is.
Exactly. I mean, and it has like there's more than the food, but then it has just the food plays a role in the actual drama, and when it just looks really beautiful. Like for example, later in the film, there's a home cooking scene, and it's a lot of the film is based in Hiroshima, and it's a home scene, and it feels extremely lived in and real. There's a meal that's put out, and there's a There's a Hiroshima-style okonomiyaki, I believe, I peeked in the corner. And that's kind of like different than the Osaka version, which is much thicker and kind of the version we know. The Hiroshima version is thinner, and it's kind of like an omelet almost. And so I spotted that. I spotted bottles of Coke and water around the table. And just when you have a film that is really has a real point of view from the director, but then when the food is actually not an afterthought, it actually is part of it, but like not overselling the food. It really spoke to me. I kind of just wanted to talk about driving my car on the podcast, and thank you for indulging me.
I can't wait to see it. And maybe cook some okonomiyaki afterwards.
Yeah, thank you for saying the word right. I said it kind of wrong. Anna, what's your second one?
Okay, my second food thing that I'm really excited about this week is, so context here, I really don't like the flavor of banana. Like, banana candy is so gross to me. I hate it. But I actually had 2 really good banana desserts in the last week. One was a banana ice cream at Bar Blondeau in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. They serve this really beautiful banana ice cream alongside like a chocolate peanut butter dessert. And it just surprised and delighted me as someone who doesn't love bananas. But this was really good. And the second...
Okay, so what don't you like about bananas?
It's hard to really articulate what I don't like about bananas, but like I just don't like, those are like the candies and desserts that I don't really gravitate towards.
All right.
The second really good banana dessert I had this week was a caramelized banana ganache chocolate from a chocolatier and bakery called Good Ambler in Chicago.
Ooh.
And these chocolates are really good. Like, I had sort of like a box assortment, and I was a little bit scared of the caramelized banana chocolate, but it was so good. It like actually had that caramelized banana flavor.
Like a flambe almost?
Yeah, totally. It really, really
Yeah, I feel
me.
like that's when you can nail that caramelization in a dessert or in a chocolate, that's really hard to do. What's the name of the chocolatier?
It's called Good Ambler.
Good Ambler. I'm going to remember that.
Check it
Sounds
out.
great.
Yeah. What's your second thing this week?
Well, I was reminded this week when Franz Ferdinand released their latest album, which is a greatest hits album, and they actually have 2 women in the band now, which is really rad. I love Franz Ferdinand, but it got me thinking about the lead frontman, Alex Karpanos, who has this really, really cool food history. He grew up in Scotland, cooking and working in restaurants. I know this because I read his Guardian column back in the early 2000s. And the culmination of this column was this really cool little book called Sound Bites that he wrote. It was published in 2006 on Penguin. And I still return to it. And I love this book because it kind of has a proto-Bourdainian way with it. But not in an annoying try-hard way. Like he's extremely, I think, empathetic towards his subjects. From what I remember, don't quote me, but I believe he's like the rock star traveling the world, eating foods in Argentina and in Tokyo, and he walks around Greenpoint in one of his essays in early 2000s Greenpoint, which is much different than 2022 Greenpoint. But I just have to shout him out because I love his music, but I think I like his writing even better.
That's very cool. Also, I mean, like, it makes sense for a touring musician to also be really knowledgeable about food because you're traveling all over the world and trying new things like every week. So that's really cool.
And you're taken out by promoters and you're taken out by your record label. And it's always been an interesting point of view, like the musician, the rock star. And I think, the Japanese Breakfast crossover into her memoir is a recent example, Crying in H Mart. And that book is amazing. And I think, this book is very different. Sound Bites is more of a collection of essays. But I feel like it's hard to do. A lot of musicians think they're great writers because they think that they're rock stars. They're very confident. But this one really delivers. It's called Sound Bites.
Very cool.
Anna, what's your next of 3 things?
Okay, so I recently found myself near Kalustyan's in Murray Hill, which actually I think we talked about a few episodes back because I picked up some really awesome frozen Monty from Kalustyan's.
Yeah, that's right.
I also picked up like another just wild card item, purchased while totally hungry and like not thinking straight, was a package of this Cuttlefish Inc. orzo, like jet black orzo. And I've been on a little bit of an orzo kick lately. I wrote about it for Taste this week. We can link to that in the show notes. But this black orzo was really interesting, and it's been really fun to cook with. I made sort of like a seafood paella with it the other day, and I really want to just try like cooking some brothy mussels and just like throwing some of this squid ink orzo in and like letting it soak up all that delicious garlicky broth.
Anna, that sounds like the most amazing restaurant dish. Like squid ink cuttlefish orzo with mussels. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I mean, free idea if any chefs are listening into the show. Put that on your menu. I'll come in. I'll eat it.
I feel like we should do a podcast live from Kalustyan's in the upstairs cafe.
That would be so much fun. There's so much to talk about in there. Like, you can just get lost in Kalustyan's for hours.
Actually, let's just get one of the Kalustyan's owners on the show. That's probably more doable.
Yeah, let's do it. What's another of your 3 things?
I'm realizing now that my 3 things are all media, which is strange because I do cook and I enjoy cookbooks. But I wanted to shout out a brand new cookbook-centric podcast called Everything Cookbooks, which is hosted by a really cool foursome of cookbook authors and collaborators, including Kate Leahy, Andrea Nguyen, Molly Stevens, and Kristen Donnelly. I think Andrea and Kristen have written for Taste. I'm not sure, but it's just a really, really great collection of seasoned pros in the cookbook publishing world. And their first episode just dropped, which is called Should You Write a Cookbook? Which is like a question we're asked a lot and we talk about a lot. And this podcast there's so much promise here. I can't wait to check it out.
That sounds very cool. Sounds like I have some watching and listening cut out for me this weekend. And you hopefully have some cooking cut out for you.
Absolutely. And I can't wait till we catch up again.
The Taste Podcast is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Anna Hezel. The show is produced by Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Our theme music is by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.